Hi, I'm here to introduce the topic that's going to frame our legal research unit for this term, which is the Victorian Law Reform Commission's issues paper on committals. So we use these issues papers each term as a way of framing our investigation, as an example, and as a way of building shared knowledge around research, because research in the abstract is not very meaningful. But if we actually look at how it applies to an actual ongoing issue, then we can start to see how things like cases and legislation and research and data and theory all start to fit together. So Committals is the Committals issues paper. It's a current review. It's a very interesting one. It's one that they've attempted to put through a couple of times now, and there's been problems with getting it completed each time. And this is where we get that interesting contrast between what we'd like to do with the legal system and what we can practically do, and how much energy and how much commitment it's going to take to actually change things from the way they are. And we're dealing with a system of committals which is not only prior to the internet age, but prior to the electric age. It's still basically much of the same system as when there were no police, where private citizens would just come to the courts and say, this person assaulted me, what are you going to do about it? And those individual people, the complainants, would then have to present enough evidence for the authorities to take action. And we see interesting residues of that now, in that the police prosecutor, or the DPP, is still called the complainant in the process, which seems really silly. It's like, well, they're not the complainant. They're the authorities, but we still call them the complainant because we still have so much of that old system around. So it is interesting that these things are very hard to change, and things that with modern technology, let alone electricity, you'd think we would be up there taking on the best, and all the best new technologies to offer to make these things work more effectively, but we're not. And that's because there's a real contrast between the efficiency of a system and the need to preserve fundamental rights within that system. And I think there are other issues as well. I mean, law is notoriously conservative and difficult to change, and there are going to be some magistrates in particular who are going to be very, very resistant about doing things differently to the way they're used to doing it. So there's a lot of interesting aspects to this, and one of the things I think is interesting is that it's a real systems thinking style exercise, and it's an area that we don't often get to flex our creative and analytical muscles in law, because quite often we deal with more like issues. We deal with issues like last year we looked at the institutional responses to child sexual offences, and a lot of that was about changing society and changing those big issues of victimisation and the way in which organisations condone victimisation. And a lot of the issues in that particular review were very much about the rights and wrongs of the issue, or the wrongs and further wrongs of the issue. Whereas this one, it's about a system and making the system work better. So in many ways, sorry, it's not as glamorous as one of those big sort of dramatic inquiries. However, it does let us focus on some of those things that we don't often get to think about, like how do you improve a system? What are the barriers to improvement? What are the barriers to change? And one of the important, drivers from the change is that we're getting a lot of kickback from witnesses in the system now. That witnesses have long been used, to put it in a nice way, as part of the resources of prosecution. And witnesses for a long time have been very unhappy about that, and we've acknowledged a lot of the problems with witnesses in sexual offences, particularly the complainants and the victims in those cases being put through some of the rigours of a committal process. But even ordinary everyday people are less likely to stand up and be a witness if they know that they're going to be put through in a very inconvenient, time-consuming process, and that if they don't want to be part of that process, they may be forced and compelled to be part of that process. So this is new emergence of the role of victims and the rights of victims that is really driving this current review in an interesting way. So I think there's lots of really interesting issues to come out of it. Plus, there are those questions of, well, why is it so hard to change? Why have we still got this old system in place that's been there for so long? Now, one of the first exercises we do is looking at perspectives and points of view. And certainly there's very different perspectives from court administrators and magistrates and prosecutors, accused people, victims, witnesses, all of whom have their different needs and different experiences of being part of that system. And part of the purpose of a review and a law reform body is to be able to draw those different perspectives together and to understand them better. So sometimes when say, a court administrator and a witness are at loggerheads, it's because they don't understand the perspective of that other person. And this is where another aspect of research comes in being able to understand and express those different experiences. And ultimately, this is really a balancing act. It's one of those issues where it's, and nothing would get to, if there was an easy answer, it wouldn't get to a law reform commission. If it were just a matter of saying, oh look, we'll just fix it by doing this, why wouldn't we just fix it? The difficult issues in law reform are usually those ones about balance. And here the balance really is efficiency versus justice. We have a very inefficient system, but part of its inefficiency comes from the need to protect the interests of justice in order to, protect the right to be presumed innocent, to protect the right to an accused person to not be pressured into pleading guilty. The system would be much more efficient if we could really force people to plead guilty. We could clear a lot of the backlog out if we could force, even innocent people to plead guilty, and that would smoothen things out completely. We have a very efficient system, a totalitarian system, but a very efficient system. But we can't do that. We don't live in that sort of society just yet. But part of the importance for these things as lawyers is we need to be able to be the custodians of those things and to be able to really rigorously scrutinise proposed changes and to go, is this going to have undesired effects? Is this going to change our system? Is this going to undermine the rule of law? And those are very important issues. So have a read of the paper. I think it's very interesting. It's not too long. The review we looked at last year, while we only looked at one volume of it, was I think 24 volumes. It was a ridiculous size review. This one's a nice modest size one, so it's very easy to read through in an afternoon. Of particular interest is the section on different jurisdictions and how they have responded to these reforms, because that's always a good way to have a look at what's happened and to look at some different ideas. And one of the things to think about is what the purpose of a committal is. And we start seeing lots of different purposes emerging. And here are some of them. I mean, one of them is to test the prosecution case for soundness. And this is in the interests of the accused person, so that the prosecution isn't launching these half-baked prosecutions where there's not enough evidence to go to trial. So one of the fundamental purposes of a committal, its original purpose, is to make sure there's enough evidence to proceed. But we also have another purpose in that it provides a subtle, often not so subtle, amount of pressure on someone to plead. And if someone is wavering on pleading guilty or not, it may provide that extra pressure. Hopefully someone who actually is guilty, hopefully it's not an innocent person who's going to be pressured, but to provide that pressure for them to save everyone a lot of time, including themselves, and to plead and to get on with it and to get on with the process of, paying for what they've done and making up for their crimes. So that another process, part of the purpose, is to show the accused person how serious the situation is and to give them an opportunity to plead, preferably for a reduced sentence that will be taken into account, and then not clog up the system. Another part of the role is to evaluate witnesses, and this is part of the controversial aspect, because the witnesses are not necessarily that keen on going to be cross-examined at a committal and then cross-examined again at trial. But sometimes when a case hinges on some uncertain witness testimony, a committal can work as a way of saying, is this person going to be credible at trial or not? Or is it going to be a waste of time, because once this person's cross-examined at trial, their evidence will be weak and will be undermined. So that's another purpose, but of course that raises the spectre of that difficulty of the way witnesses are treated. And a more modern purpose that started emerging is this notion of case management. And this again gets us back to the idea of systems and the idea of the legal system becoming more efficient at managing the whole of a case and not just being a series of court-based events and managing a whole system and providing a system of even of sort of a triage-based system where we can actually try and get the easier to manage systems through cases through the process quickly. And this is where someone is clearly guilty. There's a lot of evidence against them. Fingers crossed they are actually guilty. But the case management system can provide a mechanism to quickly put them through the system, to get them to plead, to get them sentenced, and to free space in the system. So that case management idea is there as well. And you'll start to see that there are other ideas and other objectives that come out of this. And this is an opportunity to start evaluating some of the practical aspects of things that you've studied. You will have done criminal law by now, but you wouldn't necessarily have looked at things in a very practical way and how they actually happen in reality. And one of the things I would really encourage everyone to do, if you've never seen a committal, is to get yourself to a magistrate's court and see a committal. Watch it occur to understand what's going on. Legal education is more than just doing coursework and assessment. Some of it's about actually learning what sort of things you're going to need to be able to do, or what sort of things happen in the real world. So I'd really recommend that, to actually see what is the process like, what's the feeling like in the court, how do the different people interact, how is it different to how we don't often see committals in film and TV, but how is the reality of that process different to the drama, the heightened drama of media representation. Now, my next step is to decide the assignment questions for this term. They will be drawn out of the questions raised by the issues paper, but I want to have another look at them before I set them, because I want to make sure there's enough substance in each question that I set that you have enough to deal with. I don't want to give you a very vague question or that it's something that's not enough to research. Admittedly, it's a very short research project. It's only a couple of pages, but I want to look through them very carefully to make sure there's enough substance for each of them. And then I'll provide you with a range, a choice of different questions that you can choose from to complete your assignment this term. Doesn't rule out if there's another question that you really want to do that comes out of the issues paper. Yeah, we can talk about it. But I think what's most important is that I've had a close look at those to make sure that it's not one that's going to have a paragraph and then you have nothing more to write about, that there's more substance there. But I will post that on Moodle and on MS Teams a little closer to the date. The important thing now is that you have a look at the Committals paper and you start thinking about it, and we're ready to go in the first week of term.